He may be the greatest coach of all time. Nick Saban went 292, 71-1 in 28 years at 4 different schools with 7 national championships and 12 conference championships, 11 in the SEC. His 17-year tenure at Alabama included 6 national titles, 9 SEC titles, and a 201-29 record. What made him stand out though? Plenty of coaches are elite, but how does Saban tower over all of his peers in terms of success? Welcome into Off the Hook Sports History, everybody. I'm Caleb Calhoun. In this video, we're going to take a look back into Nick Saban's career and what made him so successful as a college football head coach. Before we dive in, though, remember to hit that like and subscribe button, ring the bell, turn the notifications on, tell a friend, and leave a comment. We're building something great here at Off the Hook Sports, and we want you to be a part of it. Now let's dive in. There are really 3 aspects that go into whether or not a college football coach is successful. The first is obvious, their actual on-field coaching abilities. Second is organizational skills, such as ability to recruit, hiring the right staff, attention to detail, and a focus on the little things. Third, honestly, is a little bit of luck, as it comes down to timing. Successful coaches have to be in the right place at the right time, and while Saban is certainly proficient in on-field coaching and organization, his timing has been impeccable. Let's start with Saban's coaching abilities. As we dive in, we'll hit on who Saban worked with and under to help him develop the skills he had. There were 3 aspects to Saban's on-field coaching that were the hallmarks of his career. He was one of the best defensive backs coach in the history of the game, he was an X's and O's genius, and, in a huge rarity, he was a guru on one side of the ball while still understanding the other side. Saban, as an elite defensive backs coach, traces to his playing days. Born and raised in West Virginia, he played defensive back for Kent State from 1970 to 1972, the latter 2 years under future college football Hall of Fame coach Don James, who would win a national title with Washington in 1991. James was actually the one who convinced Saban to go into coaching, and Saban worked under him as a grad assistant in 1973 and 74. James was a defensive back himself when he played, but he was also a quarterback, so he understood playing the position from 2 perspectives. As he cut his teeth in the coaching ranks, he was specifically a defensive coordinator and a defensive backs coach, so that's who Saban was learning under. As Saban developed from a position coach to a defensive coordinator to a head coach, defensive backs was always his calling card. While defensive coordinator of the Cleveland Browns from 1991 to 1994 under Bill Belichick, Saban invented a new form of playing defensive back called pattern matching, where defensive backs would play zone for the first part of a receiver's route, and then when the receiver broke on the route, the defender in the vicinity of the receiver's break would switch to a man coverage on him. This was a way to counter the pass-happy offenses of division rivals, the Houston Oilers and Pittsburgh Steelers, who had more of a vertical passing attack than the West Coast offenses of the 1980s, which the Cover 2, a defense Saban was a disciple of, was designed to counter. While the Cover 2 could take away the crossing and underneath routes, the pattern matching style took away the short and deep passes and could change the defense from Cover 1 to Cover 3 on the fly. This secret weapon allowed Saban to dramatically overachieve while head coach at Michigan State and even early on at LSU before it became mainstream. It also helped Belichick and the New England Patriots produce legendary defenses as they won their first 3 Super Bowls under Tom Brady. This is because the defensive backs' new style allowed them more leeway to be aggressive with their linebackers, which can explain why they ran 3-4 defenses and oftentimes had elite edge rushers. But there were numerous aspects of the game that made Saban great before he discovered pattern matching. After all, when Belichick hired him, he had already won a MAC championship with the 9-2 record at Toledo in 1990, his first and only year as a college football head coach to that point. So what other schematic advantages did he come up with to build his profile? Well, beyond a deep understanding of coaching defensive backs, Saban understood how to disguise coverages more than most. He was a disciple of the Cover 2 as we mentioned, but he kept it multiple and complex. That was rooted in him expanding his versatility by coaching linebackers at Kent State in 1975 and 76 and then at Syracuse in 77. Mostly though, it stems from his 2 years as defensive backs coach at West Virginia in 78 and 79 and not because of what he did at WVU. During that time, he would routinely make the short drive from Morgantown to Pittsburgh to learn about the Steelers' defense. The franchise under Chuck Noll was in the midst of a dynasty in which they won 4 Super Bowls in the 1970s behind what was known as their Steel Curtain, led by Mean Joe Green. With coaches like George Pearls and Woody Woodenhofer, Pittsburgh was running a precursor to the Tampa 2 that Tony Dungy and Monty Kiffin popularized in the 1990s, which is basically the cover 2, except the middle linebacker drops into cover 3 to defend the deep ball when he reads a pass play. Noll had an open door policy for college coaches because he knew it was important to maintain those relationships so he could better evaluate college talent. Saban took advantage and learned about the complexities of the cover 2 as it was all the rage, along with the elements of the future Tampa 2. Pearls would later hire Saban to be defensive coordinator at Michigan State in 1983, where Saban coached until 1987. This was also where Saban developed the other part of what makes him elite, understanding offenses while being a defensive guru. Typically, gurus specialize on one side of the ball and hire coordinators to run the other. Josh Heupel is the head coach of Tennessee, but he's an offensive coordinator, and he hires a defensive coordinator to run that side of the ball and lets him do his thing. Saban understood both, and was even known to rip up offensive game plans the Thursday before a game and change them himself if needed. At Pittsburgh, while learning defensive schemes, he spent time with Tom Moore, the Steelers' wide receivers coach and future offensive coordinator. Moore is credited with developing the no-huddle offense behind Peyton Manning's Hall of Fame career during his time in Indianapolis. He's a brilliant offensive mind. Then Saban took a job in the early 1980s at the Naval Academy, where he met Belichick while coaching under Belichick's father, Steve Belichick, and they all coached under head coach Gary Tranquill. This was a desperation job for Saban, as he had been fired at Ohio State following the 1981 season after 2 years as defensive backs coach there. OSU head coach Earl Bruce fired his entire defensive staff to scapegoat them for his own refusal to recruit more defensive backs to counter the growing passing attack of the Big Ten in the 1980s. The new job at Navy was a godsend for Saban. He had already worked under Tranquill, who was WVU's defensive coordinator in 1979. A year later, after Saban left, Tranquill moved over to offensive coordinator. When Tranquill took over at Navy, he had spent half a decade coaching offense and the other half coaching defense, so he had a deep understanding of seeing the field from both sides. Understanding both sides of the ball was also a part of Saban's reputation for his incredible attention to detail in all aspects of football. And that attention to detail leads to the second part of what made him a great head coach: organizational skills. Saban was always known as an elite recruiter, an incredible talent evaluator, and a guy who prepared for everything. This isn't as hard to break down as his on-field coaching skills. It's actually pretty simple. Once again, it comes from playing and coaching under Don James at Kent State. It was under James where Saban developed his ability to evaluate talent and game plan. James was known to be meticulous in everything he did, which is why he won a national title at Washington in the 90s. Saban, really, just took what he learned from James and carried it with him throughout his career, from his checklist to evaluating recruits to his insistence on scripting every part of a game all week. Saban is also great at in-game adjustments, though. We're talking about a guy who switched quarterbacks in the middle of a national title game. That was probably helped by his tenure as defensive backs coach with the Houston Oilers in 1988 and 1989 under Jerry Glanville, who is the exact opposite of James. He didn't script game plans at all and was all about reacting on the fly. Other coaches are organized, gurus, detail-oriented, and able to make in-game adjustments, though. Nobody would accuse Jim Harbaugh or Kirby Smart of not being those things, and nobody would ignore Dabo Swinney or Pete Carroll as elite CEOs. So why does Saban stand out over all of them? You can say recruiting, as Saban is clearly the most successful recruiter in history. But other coaches recruit really well too, and success in recruiting has way more to do with the quality of the program a coach is at and the coach's reputation as a winner. The coach himself just has to have a base level of determination to recruit. If it was such a unique skill, you wouldn't have so many coaches who were hired for their recruiting abilities get fired pretty quickly. There was one final factor that Saban added, particularly when he took over at Alabama from an organizational standpoint, that allowed him to reach unprecedented levels of success, and it's the fact that he was ahead of the curve in hiring off-field analysts. Technically, college football teams are limited to 10 on-field assistant coaches, but Saban found a huge loophole to that by hiring just as many analysts in off-field roles to help with game planning and recruiting. This stems from his 2 years with the Miami Dolphins in the mid-2000s, when as head coach, he learned about all the analyst positions available to a team. Understanding this before anybody else did was a huge part of his successful early run at Alabama when he won 3 national championships in 4 years from 2009 to 2012. If you ever watched an Alabama game during that time, he typically had twice as many analysts or coaches on the sidelines as any other team. Hiring analysts like this is also a big reason he was able to adapt to the changing landscape of college football, such as when he brought in Lane Kiffin in 2014 as OC, and together they changed to a more up-tempo offense to adapt to the times. But by the time Saban was at Alabama, he was already a household name and a high-profile recruiter. That came from being at schools with the right infrastructure, which leads to our third factor: timing. Part of this is Saban's intelligence and knowing which jobs to pick, and the other part is luck. He blew up because he picked the right schools at the perfect time. To be fair, Saban's success at Toledo and even at Michigan State solely had to do with his skills as a coach and an organizer. Those can keep you going. In fact, he did not take the Michigan State job at the right time. He took over in 1995 for a fired Pearls who left the program on probation. Meanwhile, the Big Ten was at its toughest maybe ever. Michigan and Ohio State were rolling as programs at that point. Penn State had just recently joined and was still at its height under Joe Paterno, going undefeated in 1994. And Northwestern was having a rare elite run under Gary Barnett, sharing the Big Ten title in 1995 and 1996 before Michigan won the national title in 97. This competition combined with the probation resulted in Saban going 6-5-1, 6-6, and 7-5 his first 3 years there. But given what he inherited, any average coach, or maybe even above average coach, would have won just 3 games a year there. The timing was right in the sense that he was given a ton of leeway by the athletic department who understood what he was facing. He maybe could have been on the hot seat after going just 6-6 his 4th year in 1998, but a huge upset win over number 1 Ohio State, the only game OSU lost all year that season, kept him safe. It finally all came together the next year as he beat Notre Dame, Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State en route to a 9-2 season, which elevated his profile to take the LSU job. Now, here's where timing really came into play. LSU had gone 4-7 and 3-8 the previous 2 years under Jerry DiNardo, and the program was a waste for most of the 90s, suffering 6 straight losing seasons from 1989 to 1994. Outside of a couple of years in the 1980s, it was a decent top 20 program before that for years, but hadn't been a championship caliber program since the 1950s. Saban himself regretted the move initially. His whole staff at MSU refused to go with him, and he didn't like Baton Rouge, wanting to leave within 2 days. But here's what everybody missed. Louisiana is a top 6 state in the nation in terms of NFL talent, and LSU is the only major program in the state. So its in-state talent to competition ratio is better than any school in the nation. The level of talent is what convinced him to stay. It was a sleeping giant of a program, and in fact, it may be the easiest program to win at. We're talking about a school where Les Miles and Ed Orgeron won national championships. But if that's the case, why was it so bad before Saban? Well, 2 really bad coaches in Mike Archer and Curly Hallman were a problem in the late 80s and early 90s, but mostly a complete lack of investment by the university, including the worst facilities in the SEC and no academic support, made it an extremely unattractive school. That all changed in 1999, just as Saban was hired at LSU. Mark Emmert took over as chancellor, and whatever you think of his character or his tenure as NCAA president, he finally made the investments to turn LSU into a competent program. This was a time when many SEC schools were finally getting their facilities up to snuff, to be fair, thanks to the money coming in from the league's deal with CBS. Then there was just the state of the SEC. The SEC West was garbage at this moment. Alabama was going on probation and on the precipice of a 3-8 season under Mike DeBose. It was so bad that Mississippi State won the division in 1998 despite an 8-5 record. The East, specifically Florida and Tennessee, were easily the class of the league. Because of that, the timing lined up perfectly for Saban. He turned LSU around to go 8-4 his first year because of his elite coaching, part of which included his understanding of staff members to hire, like Jimbo Fisher and Will Muschamp. Again, organizational skills. Despite a 2-2 start and a loss to UAB at home, which would have put him on the hot seat, a huge upset win over Tennessee the next week after a quarterback switch got the program rolling. That turnaround, combined with the story of the new facilities, was enough to sell recruits. Saban just kept the in-state talent for 2001 to secure the #1 recruiting class. Historically, those guys went elsewhere, not even looking at LSU, but Saban was changing that thanks to all the help he had from the staff at the school. He continued to overachieve with what he had on the field too, and won the SEC in 2001 thanks to another huge upset against #2 ranked Tennessee after he lost his starting quarterback and starting running back in the game. Again, in-game adjustments. That was enough to set the stage for another #1 ranked recruiting class in 2003, and again, it was all due to him just keeping the talent in state. Entering that season, Saban had 2 #1 classes. It was enough. He was able to lead LSU to a 13-1 season and a BCS national title. While Saban was already a great coach, the exterior narrative, without the context, made him look even better. He took over a bad LSU program that had been irrelevant for 15 years, turned it around, and won a national title within 4 years. It was enough to immediately raise his profile as arguably the best coach in the country. Quite honestly, it's at this point that Saban would have had the run he had at Alabama if he had picked any other school of that caliber at that time. His credibility and coaching abilities were off the charts. That's what led to his NFL job 2 years later, and it's also why Alabama opened the checkbook to hire him 2 years after that. Again, with Alabama, it came down to timing. The Tide, once a storied program, had fallen off the map and were coming off a 6-7 season in 2006. However, Saban took over from Mike Shula just a year after Alabama's probation and scholarship limits from the Logan Young scandal had fully ended. Alabama, when at full potential, may not be the LSU job, but it's a top 5 to 10 job when it comes to recruiting talent in the area. And Saban was a national championship coach with instant credibility heading there. You almost never see a coach with his profile and his respect take over at a program as high caliber as Alabama. The only comparable situation is Urban Meyer at Ohio State, but Meyer had a bad reputation after leaving Florida with so many discipline issues, and Meyer wasn't seen as a guy who really resurrected Florida. He was seen as a guy who inherited the talent there and just had the right scheme to win it all with them. Remember, Ron Zook did leave him 3 top 5 recruiting classes. And, to be fair, it's not like Meyer wasn't successful at Ohio State. He went 83-9 with 3 Big Ten titles and a national title. Anyway, Saban's reputation was just in a different class when he took over at Alabama. It also helped that Tennessee, Auburn, and Florida State were fading as programs under longtime head coaches, so Saban had a clear field to get talent from the Florida Panhandle, in Georgia, and of course in the state of Alabama. That allowed him to secure #1 classes in 2008 and 2009, and after his national title in 2009, the rest was history. Saban consistently made smart hires with coaches like Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian. He always adapted, and he never lost his recruiting edge at a school where it's easy to recruit already. And again, the extra analysts gave him a huge advantage. His success at Alabama speaks for itself. A career of picking the right minds to become a coaching genius, making sure to run his program the right way off the field, and taking the right jobs at the right time is what propelled Saban into a legend. Guys, thanks for watching this video. Once again, please hit that like and subscribe button, turn your notifications on, ring the bell, leave a comment, tell me what you think. I want to be able to do more videos like this, but it really depends on the feedback I get from you guys. Also, don't forget to tune into our weekday podcast every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. With Caleb Calhoun, this has been a production of Off the Hook Sports History.